So hi, my name is Anu,
Hi, my name is Sonali.
and today we're going to be talking about stigmas with mental illnesses and homosexuality. So before we start, what can you tell me? Like, what do you think makes what do you think is a mental illness, or what do you think is homosexuality?
I think, well, starting with mental illnesses, I think it's just like the same as a physical illness, except like in your brain. Sometimes it's very physical, where like you get physical symptoms of like being really tired or like not being able to do basic tasks because you're so exhausted. But there's a lot of like internal confliction, which is what people mostly think about when they think about mental illnesses, like people with insecurities and low self-esteem and things like that. So I think it's just, if it's something that takes up a lot of space in your brain and it affects the way that you make decisions, and if it's something where a lot of things are converging together, like you feel a lot of symptoms at once and you can kind of either put a label to it or put a bunch of different labels on it, I feel like that's kind of what a mental illness is. And then as far as homosexuality, I don't know my exact sexuality, but in terms of romantic stuff, I don't know. I identify as bi because I like both guys and gals, and anyone else who identifies as any different gender. But it's basically just attraction to the same sex or to a different sex than the typical like heterosexuality, and that can be like romantic or sexual.
So like 30 years ago, both mental illnesses and homosexuality were like really taboo.
Yeah.
And obviously we've moved forward as a generation. We're a bit more accepting and
Yeah.
a bit more diverse. But do you still think there's like a stigma around mental illnesses?
I think definitely there's a stigma around mental illnesses because a lot of people think today that you're just making it up because it's become such a popular, like trendy topic.
Yeah.
People think that and that is true. Some people want it to be real. Some people want to have a mental illness because they feel like it makes them a more interesting person or gives them like a sense of identity, which I can definitely understand. But for people with actual mental illnesses, I feel like they've just been around for a really long time, but everyone's been too scared to talk about them. And now that like everything is coming up, everyone's suspicious of each other. Like, oh, do you really feel this way? Do you really feel that way? Or is it just because society is telling you that you're supposed to?
So then how do you know like if it's a real mental illness or if it's something that's being imposed on you, that you're kind of pressured into feeling like you should have a mental illness?
I feel like it depends on how you are with other people versus yourself. Because it, like when you are by yourself, I think is when you're the most honest. And like if you're sitting alone in your room and you still feel terrible and like no one's watching you, you don't feel pressured by anyone to act a certain way or to like fit in with a group of people. Because I know nowadays, like a lot in school too, everyone's always complaining about like how tired they are, how stressed out they are. And I feel like that's just kind of a negative atmosphere to enter into, and you feel like you have to act like that too, even if you're having an okay time. So I feel like if you're by yourself and you're starting to feel okay or you feel a little bit more healthy, then I think that it's not really maybe a mental illness, and that's just you feeling like societal pressures. But I think that when you're by yourself and you do feel terrible, I think that's more like leaning towards a mental illness.
And how do you think in schools today people are accepting the fact that students do have mental illnesses or they are homosexual? How do you think that in general schools are handling this?
Okay, so starting out with mental illness, I think that teachers have become a lot more accepting with like in terms of excusing absences or like extending test dates for students who have like a lot piling up at once and who are really stressed out. And I think that in general, students are just a lot more accepting of each other who have mental illnesses, because like a lot of us are in the same boat together. And lots of teenagers have similar mental illnesses because we all kind of live in the same environment and we hang out with the same people. So I feel like there's a lot of relatability with kids, and that's why it's easier for us to empathize with one another. But like back then, like 30 or 40 years ago, everyone didn't really talk about their emotions that much. It was really hard to connect with people. So if somebody came out and said like, I have depression, people would be like, no you don't, because we haven't seen that, because you haven't put that out there. But now that people are a lot more honest with themselves, I think it's easier to accept people and to understand them. And then as far as homosexuality goes, I think that people like underestimate just how much of the population has a different sexual orientation. Everyone thinks like when they come out or if they're closeted, like I'm the only gay kid, I'm the only bi kid, I'm the only trans kid. And then they don't realize that there's a lot of other kids who are like them, who are probably like right in their school too, because everyone's just too afraid to say it. So I feel that with people coming out and becoming more open and accepting, and with like pride events and with GSA clubs popping up, and with like posters and safe zones everywhere in schools, I feel like that just creates a much safer space for, well, both mental illnesses and for homosexuality.
But like still we see so many kids that are like hiding, they're either closeted or they're hiding the fact that they have depression or anxiety or whatever. So why do you think that is? Do you think there's still some sort of like stigma surrounding these illnesses even though it's so popular nowadays?
I think definitely one of the big things is because like it feels like everyone has it. Like either everyone has the mental illness or everyone identifies as something other than straight, or at least there's so many people who do, where you start questioning, am I like this because that's who I really am, or because I'm influenced by everyone around me? So I think everyone's just mostly afraid, like, will people believe me if I tell them this? And especially with being biromantic or bisexual, that's like a big hotly debated like teen thing where you're just going through a phase, like you don't really like girls, you're going to marry a man someday. I feel like lots of parents especially think that kids are just going through these phases, or because they're having a hard time they want a label, they want something to put it on, when a lot of the times it is true, like it's not a phase and where it's a part of your life.
Yeah. So how do you think that, so obviously it's still, especially in some cultures and some environments, it's still really not as popular to have a mental illness or to be homosexual. So how do you think that kids, especially with like all the culture, the pop culture and like the social media, whatever they're exposed to, like how do you think that we can move even more forward and it can be completely widely accepted?
I think a big thing with social media, like Instagram especially, is where people always post like the happy moments and the high moments, and you never see any of the lows. So like if you're like an average teenager like scrolling through your feed, scrolling to like all the social medias that you have, you only see people looking happy, and that reinforces the idea that like, oh, these people might look sad and they might look down at school and stuff like that, but the image they put out there is happy, so I should look happy to everyone else too. So I feel like even though we're trying to be more open and more honest with ourselves, we still kind of put up a layer to the public, and because everyone's doing that, it's so hard to be the first person who like steps out of that shell and says that they're not going to act this way. And then with homosexuality and stuff like that, I feel like because we have the internet and places where people can freely express their opinions, it's so easy to go online and see like a barrage of hate comments, or like ignorant people, or people who hate you because of who you like or what gender you identify as. And it's really easy to get lost in like rabbit holes or like threads or comments or videos of people telling you that you're not who you're supposed to be, or you're lying, or anything like that. And I think that it's important for us to step out of that shell of like caring about what everyone else thinks about like the millions of people who we can like watch on YouTube or like see on Instagram think, and like stay focused in our own community and say like, these people might not accept me, these people might not believe me, but I know my family does and I know my friends do.
But especially at a teenage age, and with social media and everybody putting out their perfect lives on social media and on whatever, like you always hear about the positives of everybody's life. So how do you not let what people think influence you, because like as a teenager it's so important to you that every single person likes you, and every single thing you do you want to feel accepted, because that just, you feel validation when you're accepted. So obviously certain kids, like they feel like their depression or whatever, their mental illness or their homosexuality makes them less of a person. And when people say that, or like when people make them feel like that, then they just close up. So how do you think that teenagers should deal with this, kind of like stop caring about what other people think?
I think like, because we're both teenagers and we both struggle with this kind of stuff, it's kind of hard to find like a black and white answer, because it does depend on the person, it does depend on like your level of insecurity, how long you've struggled with the illness, how big it is in your life. And I do think that it's really, really hard, and honestly like I wish that there was a concrete answer on how to just stop caring about what other people think, because that's such a big problem. But I think the most important thing to remember is that at the end of the day, like the people who are going to be with you are your friends and family, and those are the only people who matter. And like all these people who say stuff to you, like say things that really hurt you or that make you feel like inadequate or unaccepted, those people aren't going to be doing more than that. Like they can say whatever they want to you, but they can't ruin your life, you know. They can't make you feel so terrible because they don't know you. There's kind of this, I feel like, separation between you and some random person who has an opinion on your mental illness or on your sexuality, because I feel like the people who can hurt you most are the people closest to you. And as long as the people closest to you are accepting of you, I feel like it's easier to not care about like some random person on the street.
So you mentioned family and friends, obviously, and that's a big part of like any teenager's life. But how do you approach the same problem when you feel like your friends and family won't accept you either? Like I know maybe friends, they're a bit more open-minded, but what about family?
So I see this especially with like sexuality. You know, there's lots of cases of like kids being kicked out by their parents or shunned, like their family doesn't speak to them. Their family doesn't show up to their wedding if it's not like the perfect traditional wedding that they'd envisioned. And I think that like obviously that's really hard to deal with because these are the people you've grown up with, and you kind of naturally expect them to be with you for your entire life, and you don't really consider the fact that they might not accept you for the way you are. So I think that when that happens, like after you deal with that and after you process that, like you have to find a support group or you have to find people quickly, because that's a really dangerous time for someone to feel inadequate and invalidated by the people whose opinions they care about the most, right? So I feel like online support groups and like just reaching out to other kids in school who maybe you don't talk to that often, I feel like that's really important, because I think that like at school especially, how you mentioned that friends are generally like more open and accepting. Like all teenagers right now are pretty much going through the same thing. They have like some variation of the same like depressing life or depressing ideas or something weighing on them. So everyone's got a problem, and since we're all around the same age group too, it's easier for us to understand each other. So I just think that like if your family doesn't accept you the way you are, which is terrible and awful, and you can't really get past that, I think the most important thing to do is to find friends or a support group, whether it's like in person or online.
So overall, how would you say that as a community we can kind of leave this idea of like this stigma, this horrible like branding that we've put on mental illness and homosexuality? How do you think we can move forward as a community?
I think that a really important thing is for celebrities to speak out, because in this age of like social media, they have so much influence, and like kids really care about what their idols say. I think there's a lot of like celebrities who've spoken out about the mental illness who really made people feel better, because they're like, this person went through depression, this person has anxiety, but they're still like super successful and they're brave enough to share their story with everyone. Or this person is gay, this person is trans, and they came out and they're still doing really well. I feel like that's really important to show like the things that you can accomplish, even with like the stigma of mental illness or the stigma of homosexuality. And I think it's a little bit dangerous to kind of venture into like everyone should overshare about their lives or like put a lot of negative stuff out there. I think when you are talking about these kinds of things, you have to be really safe, and you have to make sure that even though you talk about the hardships, you talk about the good times too, and you keep like a positive outlook, because I feel like on social media you have like a lot of influence, and you don't want to be saying like a whole bunch of things that are going to make people feel really depressed or make people feel really worried about their own sexuality. I think that in order to move forward as a society, we just have to find a way to have a healthy conversation. And for people who don't understand, or for people who are ignorant, like you have to educate them, because I don't really think it comes from a place of wanting to be hateful. It just comes from a place of not wanting to understand or not really knowing what mental illness is or what different sexualities are.
So the not knowing part pertains more to like older like parents or like teachers or like the more conservative age group. So like obviously these like celebrities and stuff, they may speak out about it, but the message might not really reach parents, or might not really reach an older age group. So how do you convey the same message to them, or how would you go about that?
I think that there just needs to be like education among parents. Like I said, like when I mentioned kids being kicked out because of their sexuality, they are being kicked out, but there's other parents who are taking them in. Like for every parent who doesn't understand your identity or who doesn't understand your mental illness, there's going to be another adult who does. And I feel like it's really up to our parents' responsibility to educate each other when we can't, because so often, like, if you're younger, you're seen as less intelligent, less important, and it's hard for you to convey your thoughts and opinions without just feeling so inferior. So I feel like for that age group, it's really with the responsibility of the parents who do understand to try and accept children who have been cast out of their homes. And I think it's important for them to join organizations like, I know lots of parents have joined like pride organizations and have like led rallies for the children who don't have parents who would be supportive of them.
Well, thank you so much for your time,
Thank
Sonali.
you. This is really nice.
Thank you, and thank you so much for watching. Okay, bye.
Bye.